India's 1,000th homemade T-90 tank rolled off the line. On May 22, the heavy vehicles factory in Avadi, a city outside Chennai in southern India, rolled out the 1,000th T-90 Bhishma main battle tank built on Indian soil, completing a production run that began with Russian blueprints and foreign components 2 decades ago, and ends with a tank that is roughly 80% Indian by content, including an engine developed and manufactured entirely within the country. Armored Vehicles Nigam Limited, the Indian state-owned company that oversees tank production at Avadi, announced the delivery of the 1,000th T-90IM Bhishma to the Indian Army. The designation T-90IM, where IM stands for indigenously manufactured, distinguishes the locally produced variant from the original Russian-assembled vehicles India received in the early 2000s when it first adopted the platform. The journey from imported kit to domestic manufacture took more than 20 years and required India to progressively master technologies that Russia was not always willing to transfer quickly or completely, from engine production to electromagnetic turret drive systems that replaced the original hydraulic mechanisms. The T-90 is a third-generation Russian main battle tank introduced in the early 1990s as an evolution of the Soviet-era T-72 that India had already operated for decades. India signed its first contract for the platform in February 2001, initially receiving 124 fully assembled tanks from Russia, with the remaining vehicles arriving in semi-knockdown kit form for final assembly at the Heavy Vehicles Factory. A 2006 licensed production agreement authorized HVF to manufacture 1,000 T-90S tanks domestically. And production reached its first significant milestone in 2009 when the factory delivered the first fully Indian-assembled T-90S, meaning a vehicle where the components were manufactured in India rather than simply bolted together from imported parts. The Avadi factory has been India's primary armored vehicle production facility since 1961, when the Ordnance Factory Board established it to give the country domestic manufacturing capability for heavy military equipment. Over its 6 decades of operation, the factory has produced the Vijayanta, India's first domestically assembled tank based on a British design, the T-72 built under a Soviet-era license, and the indigenously designed Arjun main battle tank alongside successive generations of the T-90, accumulating a total output of more than 4,600 armored vehicles. That production history gave Avadi's workforce a depth of engineering experience that made the T-90 indigenization program technically feasible, even when the pace of technology transfer from Russia fell short of what India's planners had originally projected. The indigenization effort on the T-90IM covered systems that defense manufacturers typically guard most carefully. AVNL has fully localized the V92S2 diesel engine that powers the Bhishma, a significant achievement given that engine production for armored vehicles involves precision machining, metallurgy, and quality control standards that took India years to develop domestically. The local supply chain absorbed complex line replacement units, the modular subsystem packages that allow field maintenance without specialized factory equipment, along with electrical systems and cooling architectures that had previously depended on Russian suppliers. Newer production batches have also incorporated a 1350 horsepower indigenous engine being introduced for fleet upgrades, pushing the platform's mobility beyond the specifications of the original Russian design. With more than 1,300 T-90 variants in active service alongside the older T-72 and the indigenous Arjun tanks, the Indian Army operates one of the largest armored fleets in Asia, structured to cover 2 demanding and very different border environments simultaneously. On the western front facing Pakistan, armored formations deploy across the plains of Punjab and Rajasthan, where the T-90's firepower and mobility can be used at scale. On the northern front facing China, the terrain changes entirely, with high-altitude passes and narrow valleys, where the 2020 Galwan standoff demonstrated that India needed mobile armored capability in places where logistics chains are thin and temperature extremes test both crews and machinery. The T-90 Bhishma has been deployed to both environments, and Indian crews have added improvised cage armor to their vehicles in response to the drone threat that the war in Ukraine brought to the attention of every army operating legacy armored platforms without purpose-built counter-UAS protection. The 1,000th tank delivery also carries a commercial dimension that extends beyond the Indian Army's immediate requirements. AVNL's demonstrated ability to manufacture a complex armored platform at volume and to progressively increase domestic content while maintaining operational quality positions the company for future export conversations, particularly as countries across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa evaluate their armored fleets in light of combat lessons from Ukraine. India's broader defense export ambitions have grown significantly over the past several years, with the government setting targets for defense exports that would have seemed implausible a decade ago, and a track record of 1,000 domestically manufactured tanks strengthens the credibility of those ambitions considerably. What the Avadi milestone represents at its core is the completion of a bet India placed on itself more than 2 decades ago. Rather than remaining permanently dependent on Russian deliveries and Russian repair pipelines for its primary armored platform, India chose to absorb the technology, build the industrial base, and accept the delays and cost overruns that came with developing genuine manufacturing competence. The 1,000th T-90IM rolling out of HVF is the proof that the bet paid off, and the 1350 horsepower engine being introduced for upgrades is evidence that the industrial capability built to fulfill that original contract is now producing technology that goes beyond what the license originally specified.